Dean Martin was attending what he thought would be a routine charity fundraiser at St. Michael's Community Church in Los Angeles on October 15, 1978. When he accidentally walked into the wrong room and discovered Pastor Williams counting thousands of dollars in cash that was supposed to go to local orphanages. What Dean did about that discovery would destroy Pastor Williams's life and create one of the most satisfying moments of justice in entertainment history. The discovery. Dean had arrived at St. Michael's Church that evening to perform at a charity benefit concert organized to raise money for 3 local orphanages that were struggling financially. The event was supposed to raise funds for basic necessities like food, clothing, and educational supplies for over 200 orphan children in the Los Angeles area. But Dean's early arrival would reveal that the charity's organizer had very different plans for the donated money. Dean had gotten to the church 30 minutes before the scheduled rehearsal time because his driver had misjudged traffic. Looking for the main sanctuary where the performance would take place, Dean opened what he thought was the correct door and instead walked into Pastor Williams' private office. What he saw made his blood boil. Pastor Williams was sitting at his desk, counting large stacks of $20 and $50 bills, carefully organizing them into separate piles. Next to him were donation envelopes that had clearly been opened, and a ledger book where Williams was writing figures that obviously didn't match the amount of cash on the desk. Dean watched silently for nearly a minute as Williams systematically skimmed money from charity donations. For every $100 Williams counted, he put 80 into one pile and 20 into another. The smaller pile was labeled Orphanage Fund, in Williams' handwriting. The larger pile was labeled Church Operations. But Dean could see receipts scattered around the desk that revealed the truth about church operations. The receipts were for Williams' personal expenses, expensive restaurant meals, luxury hotel stays, a new Cadillac payment, and country club membership fees. Pastor Williams was stealing 80% of the money that people had donated specifically to help orphan children. Dean stepped back into the hallway and quietly closed the door, his mind racing with anger and disbelief. He had performed at dozens of charity events over the years, and he had always trusted that the money raised actually went to help the intended recipients. The idea that a man of God would steal from orphans was more disgusting to Dean than any criminal behavior he had ever encountered. Dean knew he had to act, but he also knew he needed proof that would be impossible for Williams to deny or explain away. Gathering evidence. Instead of confronting Williams immediately, Dean decided to gather comprehensive evidence of the pastor's theft before exposing him. Dean quietly left the church and returned the next morning with a small camera hidden in his jacket. He told Williams that he wanted to visit the church early to get a feel for the spiritual atmosphere before that evening's performance. Williams, eager to maintain his friendly relationship with such a famous performer, gave Dean free access to walk around the church grounds. Dean used this access to photograph Williams' office when the pastor was conducting other business. He photographed the ledger book that showed months of systematic theft, the receipts for Williams' personal expenses, and bank deposit slips that revealed how much money was actually being sent to the orphanages versus how much was being deposited into Williams' personal accounts. The evidence was damning. Over the past 6 months, Williams had raised over $47,000 for orphanage support through various fundraising events and weekly donations from church members. But only $9,000 had actually been sent to the orphanages. Williams had stolen $38,000 that was supposed to provide food, clothing, and educational supplies for 200 orphan children. Dean also discovered that Williams had been lying to his own congregation about the charity's success. In weekly church bulletins, Williams had been reporting that the orphanage fund was fully meeting the needs of our supported children and thanking church members for their generous support that is making such a difference in young lives. The reality was that the 3 orphanages were desperately struggling because they weren't receiving the support they had been promised. Dean called the directors of the 3 orphanages and learned heartbreaking details about how Williams' theft was affecting real children. Mary Henderson, director of Angels Haven Orphanage, told Dean that they had been forced to serve smaller meals because their food budget had been cut. Pastor Williams told us that donations were down this year and that we'd have to make do with less support, Henderson explained. We've had to eliminate some educational programs and delay necessary repairs to our building. James Rodriguez, director of Hope House, revealed that they had been unable to buy winter coats for their children. We were counting on the charity fund to help us prepare for cold weather, Rodriguez said. Pastor Williams kept telling us that the money was coming, but it never arrived. Dean realized that Williams's theft wasn't just stealing money, it was directly harming vulnerable children who depended on community support for basic necessities. The discovery made Dean's anger turn into cold, focused determination to destroy Williams completely. The confrontation. On the evening of October 15th, Dean arrived at the church for the charity performance with a plan that would expose Williams in the most humiliating way possible. The church sanctuary was packed with 800 people who had paid to attend the charity benefit. Church members, local business owners, and families who supported orphanage work had all contributed money to attend an event that they believed would help needy children. Dean performed his usual set of songs, but when he reached the end of his scheduled performance, he made an announcement that shocked everyone in the church. Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude tonight's program, I want to talk to you about the real reason we're all here. The audience expected Dean to make a heartfelt appeal for continued support of orphanage work. We're here because we care about children who don't have families to take care of them. We're here because we believe that as a community, we have a responsibility to make sure that orphan children have food to eat, clothes to wear, and opportunities to learn and grow. People in the audience nodded and began reaching for their wallets, ready to make additional donations. But I discovered something yesterday that I think you all need to know about. Dean's tone became serious, and the church fell completely silent. I learned that over the past 6 months, you generous people have donated $47,000 to support orphanages in our community. The audience began applauding, proud of their community's generosity. Dean held up his hand to stop the applause. But I also learned that only $9,000 of your donations actually reached the orphanages. The church fell silent as people tried to process what Dean had just said. The other $38,000, money that you gave to feed and clothe orphan children, has been stolen. Shocked murmurs began rippling through the congregation. Dean looked directly at Pastor Williams, who was sitting in the front row looking like he was about to faint. Pastor Williams, would you like to explain to your congregation where that $38,000 went? The breakdown. Pastor Williams stood up slowly, his face pale and his hands shaking. Dean, I think there's been some misunderstanding about the church's financial procedures. Dean reached into his jacket and pulled out copies of the photographs he had taken of Williams' ledger book and personal expense receipts. Pastor Williams, is this your handwriting in this ledger book that shows you systematically keeping 80% of charity donations for yourself? Williams tried to speak, but could only make stammering sounds. Dean continued, are these your personal receipts for expensive restaurant meals, luxury hotel stays, and country club memberships, all paid for with money that people donated to help orphans? The congregation began to understand what was happening, and angry voices started calling out from the pews. How could you steal from children? We trusted you with our donations. Those children needed that money. Williams's composure completely cracked under the pressure of 800 people staring at him with disgust and anger. Please, let me explain. Williams begged, his voice breaking. I was going to pay it back. I just borrowed the money temporarily for church expenses. Dean's voice cut through Williams's excuses like a knife. Pastor Williams, you spent $38,000 of orphan money on personal luxuries, while 200 children went without proper food and winter clothing. There is no explanation that makes that acceptable. Williams dropped to his knees in front of the entire congregation. Please forgive me. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I can make this right. Dean looked down at Williams kneeling on the church floor and delivered the line that would end Williams' career forever. Pastor Williams, you're going to do more than ask for forgiveness. You're going to pay back every penny you stole. And you're going to resign from this church tonight. And if you refuse, I'm going to make sure that every newspaper and television station in Los Angeles knows exactly what you did to those children. Williams looked up at Dean with tears streaming down his face. Dean, please, this will destroy my life, my career, everything I've worked for. Dean's response was cold and merciless. You should have thought about that before you stole food from orphans. Justice served. Within an hour of Dean's confrontation, Pastor Williams had signed a resignation letter and a confession detailing his theft of charity funds. The church's board of directors immediately took control of all financial records and launched a comprehensive audit of Williams's activities. The audit revealed that Williams' theft was even more extensive than Dean had initially discovered. Over an 18-month period, Williams had stolen over $63,000 from various charity funds. Not just the orphanage donations. He had also taken money that was supposed to go to homeless shelters, food banks, and medical assistance programs for low-income families. The congregation voted unanimously to turn all evidence over to law enforcement authorities. Williams was arrested 3 days later on charges of grand theft, fraud, and embezzlement. He was sentenced to 5 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all the charities he had robbed. But Dean wasn't satisfied with just Williams's punishment. He wanted to make sure the children got the help they needed immediately. Dean organized a replacement charity concert that raised $85,000 for the 3 orphanages. He also personally donated an additional $25,000 to make sure that the children received everything they had been denied while Williams was stealing their support money. Most importantly, Dean established an oversight system to ensure that future charity funds would be properly managed and distributed. He hired an independent accounting firm to monitor all charity activities at St. Michael's Church and required monthly public reports on how donated money was being used. Dean's actions didn't just punish Williams. They created a model for charity accountability that was adopted by dozens of other religious organizations in Los Angeles. The aftermath. The story of Dean Martin exposing Pastor Williams became a sensation in Los Angeles media and a cautionary tale about charity fraud that was discussed nationwide. Dean Martin exposes pastor who stole from orphans, Los Angeles Times. Singer's investigation reveals $63,000 charity theft, People magazine. How Dean Martin saved 200 orphan children. Variety. But the most meaningful recognition came from the children and families whose lives Dean had protected. Mary Henderson, director of Angels Haven Orphanage, wrote Dean a letter that he kept framed in his dressing room. Mr. Martin, because of what you did, our children now have warm winter coats, nutritious meals, and educational opportunities that we couldn't provide when Pastor Williams was stealing their support money. But more than that, you showed these children that there are adults in the world who will fight to protect them, even when they can't protect themselves. Several of our older children have said that they want to grow up to be like you, someone who stands up for people who need help. James Rodriguez from Hope House sent Dean a handmade card signed by all 47 children at his orphanage. The card read, "Thank you, Mr. Dean Martin, for making sure we got our money back. Now we can have good food and warm clothes. You are our hero." Dean received hundreds of letters from church members and community donors thanking him for exposing Williams' theft. Many people wrote that they had been considering reducing their charitable donations because they weren't sure their money was being used properly. But Dean's example had restored their faith in community generosity. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome for Dean was learning about Williams' life after prison. Williams was released from state prison in 1983. After serving 4 years of his 5-year sentence, he was unable to find work in any religious capacity because his criminal record made him unemployable by any church or religious organization. He eventually found work as a night shift janitor at a factory in Riverside, California, earning minimum wage and living in a small apartment. Every month, Williams was required to send a portion of his paycheck to the orphanages as restitution for his theft. When Dean learned about Williams' circumstances, he was quoted as saying, "I'm not sorry that Williams lost his comfortable life. Those orphan children never had comfortable lives to begin with, and Williams stole money that was supposed to help them survive. Now he knows what it's like to struggle financially while other people control his future. Maybe that will teach him some empathy for the children he robbed." Dean Martin's confrontation with Pastor Williams became legendary within charitable organizations as an example of how celebrity influence could be used to protect vulnerable populations. Several other entertainers began conducting their own investigations of charities before agreeing to perform at fundraising events. The Dean Martin Standard became an informal term used by charity watchdog organizations to describe the level of financial transparency that donors should expect from reputable charitable organizations. When Dean Martin died in 1995, his obituary in the Los Angeles Times included this tribute. Dean Martin's entertainment career brought joy to millions, but his greatest performance may have been his exposure of charity fraud that protected orphaned children from continued exploitation. At Dean's funeral, representatives from the 3 orphanages that Dean had saved attended as honorary pallbearers. Mary Henderson, who was still director of Angels Haven Orphanage, delivered a eulogy on behalf of all the children Dean had protected. Dean Martin taught us that fame and success mean nothing if you don't use them to protect people who can't protect themselves. The children he saved in 1978 are adults now, and many of them have become teachers, social workers, and community leaders who continue his legacy of standing up for vulnerable people. Dean Martin didn't just expose one corrupt pastor. He showed an entire generation of children that there are adults who will fight for justice on their behalf. The legacy of Dean's confrontation with Pastor Williams continues today. The Dean Martin Charity Accountability Foundation, established in 1996, provides oversight and auditing services for religious and charitable organizations throughout California. The foundation's motto, inspired by Dean's famous words to Williams, is, "You should have thought about that before you stole from children."